Okay, great. So it sounds like we're ready to go. So I'm going to just get started. So good evening, everyone, and good morning for those who are watching this later. My name is Jeff St. John, and I'm going to be talking tonight about building tools with men. And so I'm going to do a little bit different than I've done in the past. Um, I was just saying to Mike earlier, I spend a lot more time facilitating and hosting conversations than I do giving sort of more of a one way. So I'm really excited to be here tonight. I think this is a really important conversation, and I'm really honored to be able to contribute just a little bit and talk about my story, my journey, and some of the makings of what led us to create the Menand Project, which, if you don't know about, you'll learn about. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about my story. And then I want to talk to you a little bit about the Menand Project, which is a set of resources and a group of people that are working to create a different kind of system for accessing mental health and relational skill building for men. So I'm going to share my screen. And as I said, I'm gonna try and do this a little bit differently than I've done before. And usually when I talk, I share a lot of research and I do a lot of training, but I don't often share a lot about myself. So I'm going to do that a little differently tonight, and I hope you're okay with it. So I think everyone can see my screen, and we're going to talk about building tools with men. So what is the Menand Project? Well, and I'm going to start by talking the Menand Project and a little bit about myself. So the Menand Project is a project around building tools for mental health literacy and relational skill building for men. So my work, I work with both the Menand Project as the founder and the director, and I am the CEO of Blue Rock Social Impact Partners. So I really work at the intersection of supporting people with their inner development, with their relational skills, with their relational work. And I do that in a context of often leadership development in organizations, but really around people who are working towards social impact. So with Blue Rock Social Impact Partners, I do that with nonprofit agencies, I do it with government, and I do it with for-profit organizations that are working at having a social impact in the world by building those relational practices. I'm here tonight because I really believe in this work, and I believe in this work with Menand and the work that we do around building relational cultures. And I think we need to change the culture, and not just about men, but with men. And I think that we need to do this to build cultures that are restorative, that are responsive, and really get at and are open to the complexity of men's mental health, their trauma, and their healing, and also their violence. And I think it'll take all of us. I think building these restorative communities will need to build useful tools and create relational practices. And I think we need to do that in a way that's very intentional. And so tonight I want to talk a little bit about that, a little bit about my work, but I want to start with my journey and how I came to be really passionate about this. And I know that so many people that are speaking tonight, and Brian's last session, I saw a little bit, and the other speakers for the next two nights. It's just such a wonderful community of people who are concerned with men's mental health and changing the conversation. And so I think it's really an important time to be having these conversations as we go forward. So I want to share a quote really quick, and I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to actually read you an excerpt from a larger piece of writing I did about my journey of becoming a single father. And I'm going to do that as sort of a way in to start talking about why we need to build tools that support men in a different kind of way. This is an old quote for me. I love Frederick Buechner. He talks about the place you're called is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. And I think that this is such a helpful way, and it's been a real North Star to me in my work, to keep coming back to the notion that the thing you're called to do is not some mysterious thing, Your purpose is really found in what lights you up, and the intersection between what lights you up and what the world really needs, what the world is hungering for. And so in my experience, and I talk a lot about purpose with organizations and leaders and people, is that for most of us, purpose is most powerfully found in your healing. It's most powerfully found as you rediscover your wholeness. For most of us, when we do purpose exercises, we do a list of the hard things in life and the things that light us up, and we try and find a path in the middle. So I'm going to read a little bit of my story, and I'm reading it because it's a very personal story, and I think that the way that I've written it is probably a better way to articulate it than me trying to just describe it tonight. So if you'll indulge me, I'll just read a little bit of my story. So pop some popcorn and have a drink, and let me read to you. I still remember the first jolt from the euphoria of becoming a new father. I've been up 48 hours and the coffee hasn't helped as it usually does. My neck is hot. I feel the sharp pull of nausea and a strange yet strong sense of being watched suspiciously as an outsider. It was minutes following my daughter's birth. Present for every moment, I was beyond giddy with being the first to hold this precious bundle. After a short walk, I'm asked to leave. The nurses are going to attend to my wife. I return to discover this is, in part, their way of creating space to ask my wife if she and her baby felt safe. Policy for all new mothers giving birth in the hospital system, nurses conduct a safety assessment to ensure that moms feel safe and supported and that their baby will be well cared for. In my experience, fathers weren't asked, well, anything. Even then, I understood why. I had been trained, I'd worked in the human services, and I even thought it was a good idea. But it was the first time I realized the world might see me as extraneous to the parenting journey, or worse, a potential threat. Feelings I'd never had before and for which I still don't have words welled inside me. This was the beginning of my fathering journey. I felt an immediate and profound connection with my daughter and a seemingly corresponding suspicion and expectation from those around me that I was one of the greatest potential threats to my daughter's well-being. I had not expected this. The sense of being an unnecessary outsider was palpable in that moment and has evolved as I've moved forward in my parenting journey. The birth of my daughter and the experiences in the first months of fathering intensified this immensely, as my experience was simultaneously what I hoped for and deeply dissatisfying all at once. Despite a sense of deep peace and joy at becoming a father to a wonderful daughter, and the deep desire I have long had to be an intentional father and an integral part of every aspect of my daughter's development, I felt like those around me began almost overnight to have rigid expectations about how I would fulfill my fathering hope. January 23rd, shy of 3 years later. The door closes, silence rings in my ears. I walked around and inventory what's left. A dining room table that I hadn't wanted, 2 crappy chairs, a bed frame with no mattress. The house was otherwise empty except for a baby crib, boot prints from the movers, and scattered garbage emptied out of drawers and boxes discarded during the whirlwind that lasted only an hour. I was mindful enough to take pictures of the disaster. It was like the place had been ransacked. I felt completely vulnerable and exposed. It's the first time I cry in years. Not once through all our arguments had I been driven to tears, just quiet and sometimes not so quiet anger. I'd always found it chaotic and painful. I just didn't see the use in giving in to the tears. I couldn't find a place where it was safe for my emotions anyway. The intensity of her emotions seemed to invite me to uphold a calm and collected facade. What was underneath was anything but. If I don't hold it together, who will? Shortly after, my dad arrives at the house. He hugs me, maybe for the first time since I was a kid. I remember thinking how strange this is. My father and I don't interact this way at all. He has always left the caring stuff to my mom. He doesn't know what to do either, I thought. At least he came. We spent the day trying to bring order to this empty home. I scrubbed and cleaned as if I'd moved into a new house. The basement filled with the leftovers you'd normally find after a rushed packing job, and the grime of not cleaning for the weeks and months leading up to this day. I was desperately driven to create a calm space for my daughter to return to that night. The main floor held only a table with 2 chairs. The only room left intact was my daughter's. Everything else was gone. For me, this day represents profound loss and numerous personal failures, particularly in the sight of my loved ones. With some, I feel shame, knowing they believe I'm weak for letting my relationship reach this place. I discovered later it was also the day that my community began to disappear. Quiet comments of not picking sides rang in my ears. My father brings the toy kitchen that he and my mom bought for my daughter. He sets it down in the middle of the barren living room, and we take it out and move the kitchen to the basement. In the blur of the months leading up to this day, I'd known only that I wanted to make the house calm and that maybe it could feel like some kind of positive change. It's January. My daughter's 2. Cutting a door and window in the side of the empty cardboard box, I find some crayons and set them aside. In the pile of garbage downstairs, I found some unused ribbons from a birthday celebration that never happened and started hanging them from the top of the box. I spent the last hour before my daughter came home, writing her name in big letters on the side of the box, hoping she'd be distracted from the completely barren house and the absence of her mother. I spend a solid year in that box. At least it feels like it. My daughter loves playing in the box. Every night after work, I pick her up from her day home and I return home. I make dinner, she plays, and then demands to play house. We spend countless hours in that box. We eat many of our meals and play house and dolls in that box. Mostly I sit in the dark of the box while she comes and goes, handing me dolls and kitchen utensils, telling me what to cook or how to change the diaper on the doll. She turns 3. This is the beginning of 3 years of my life as a slow motion blur. It feels like a kind of exile into a very bleak desert land, like a discharge, as if one had been fired from a task on the day of the wedding. The quote from another author. Profound loneliness, continued moments of conflict, endless hours of quiet, and my daughter murmuring about how to play dolls as we camp in the basement. On the weeks she's with her mom, I work, eat, and sleep in a different kind of box, perhaps more of a metaphorical one. I go months at a time without talking to any friends, and when I do, it's awkward and difficult. I'm sure they feel it was I that made the choice not to reach out during this time. They're busy with their own lives. When we do talk, I feel judged and find ways to talk even less. I pour myself into work until I exhaust myself, and then I cope by eating. I stay in the dark, little townhouse, and it becomes a sanctuary and a prison. For 3 long years, I spent every waking moment that I could with my daughter. And when I wasn't with her, I worked until I couldn't any longer, taking extra jobs to buy furniture and refurnish the house and rebuild my life. Some thought I'd become a workaholic and offered thoughts that maybe this was the reason my marriage ended. A deep fatigue set in as a companion to my darkening depression and anxiety. I was well educated. I'd worked for 15 years leading men to build character in the backcountry, leading people to do human service work. But I was in a season where leading myself to get up and keep going was the most profound challenge I could tackle. Admitting I needed help was not easy, but where and when I did, it was also not received well. It was the beginning of a much longer, darker night. So I share this story, and I've shared this story in other contexts before, because for me, this was my turning point. My turning point was in the dark of that box with my young daughter, learning to be a single dad, an experience that I never thought would happen to me, and in a community where I thought an involved father would be embraced and supported, and found that my experience was very much different. And so for me, that journey and those moments led me into a bit of a journey. And I'm a guy that likes to research and understand things. I'm a guy that likes to build things and create. And so the journey that I was on led me to really start to understand and want to understand the experiences of men, and in particular, the experiences of men who were single dads and trying to be involved fathers. And so what was interesting is as I started to do that, I found that I wasn't actually that unusual and that lots of men have these experiences. In fact, lots of men who have become single fathers often find that they have a really difficult time adjusting with that. Depression is higher, psychological, behavioral, and financial problems are higher with single dads than with married ones. There's higher rates of depression. But the thing that really struck me as I did a lot of this work and research, and it resonated with my own experience, that there was a mourning of the loss of family and children more than of the relationship, and a difficulty separating and really understanding, who am I if I'm not a husband and a father, but just a father? And there isn't a lot of community contexts that really well embrace those things. And so it can feel like a very alone experience. And so as time went on and I took my personal journey of understanding these things and started to find that I was going to end up marrying it to my professional journey as someone who did research and worked with social impact agencies. And so I started working with organizations that were trying to engage men. And what I found as I did that is that not just in stories of men who become single fathers, but men in all sorts of different types of relationships or struggling with mental health had very similar stories. And the stories sounded a little bit like this: feeling trapped, finding that they had chosen a path of following expectation or rising to expectation over their own sense of purpose, finding that they were living a life that was more about adhering to a role or some idea of how they were supposed to be rather than being present to the relationships that they were in. And there's also some stories that really became prevalent around looking for help, but not in the ways that our systems and services are organized. Looking for help with buddies, but in a very indirect way, trying to find help without asking quite directly, talking to family if they felt like they were safe to do that. And of course, looking online. Most, especially as I started to work with organizations who were trying to work with men who had used violence in their relationships, often had a story that talked about realizing a little bit too late that the journey was about healing their own pain. And the lateness of their discovery had consequences that were really quite fracturing to their life. We also found, as we did a lot of this work over, and this was a number of studies over a bunch of years, that there's really this 2-year rule that plays out, that when a guy understands or starts to feel that there's something concerning about his behavior or his mental health or what's going on for him, that there's really the 2-year period where he starts looking, and he actually starts looking quite actively. There's a bit of a myth around help seeking in men, but that he really starts looking actively to fix these things. And that we find that he doesn't look in formal places, but looks online and talks to friends and family. So one of the stories that we often tell in how we came to build the Menand Project is of a story of a guy just like that, who had been in a relationship where he was on the receiving end of abuse, and he was actually trying to figure out how to deal with the violence of his partner. And he had looked and he had tried to talk to friends, but didn't find that he could feel safe to share those things. He had looked for services, and he couldn't find a lot of services that would rightly position what he was looking for. And so he ended up online. And when he ended up online, he ended up on a Reddit forum. Now, Reddit forums are great if you're fixing a stereo and don't know what you're doing. But oftentimes, if you're a person in this kind of situation looking for help, you get all sorts of different types of feedback. And in this young man's case, he asked what to do if he was being hit by his partner. And the Reddit forum almost unanimously came back and said, hit her back. And what happened next is what you might predict. And so our discovery over the years about how men are seeking help, particularly around their mental health and their relational well-being, really led us to understand that there's this 2-year period that we could do something better with. And this was one of the seeds for the beginning of our work with the Menand Project. One of the things that we came to as we were starting to formulate our ideas after several years of these different studies, we came across this quote by Janice Stein, who was the former founding director of the Munk School of Global Affairs. And it really struck me, and it became one of the things that as we went forward and started trying to understand what was going on in school systems and what was going on with young men, she encapsulates it so well when she's asked a question at a panel conversation about what keeps her up at night, basically. And she says, well, not chemical weapons or nuclear weapons, but young unemployed males who see no opportunity and are deprived of dignity in their future. This quote is very much why I bring up purpose at the beginning of these talks, to talk about how important it is to understand the roots of how do you heal your pain into something more purposeful. And I think her concern is many of our concerns, is the world has changed so much. And the services and supports that are available to men aren't what they need to be. One of the things that I have said for a long time, and in the context of our work with Menand, is kind of like what you've heard before, if you've heard the phrase, hurt people, hurt people. But one of my favorite authors actually says it a little differently, because and I think it needs to be said a little differently, that there's actually a bit of responsibility in there. Suffering comes for all of us. And if we don't transform our pain, we'll transmit it. And that might be in a very internal or inwardly directed kind of way. It might be that the pain that we're transmitting is in behaviors that are maybe controlling, or they're maybe self-critical, or they may be in having relationships where we use tools to isolate or control or maybe monitor. And if we don't, we do that out of a sense of our reactive tendencies, out of our sense of our own pain. And if we don't transform those things, we will transmit it. And that might end up being in violence at some point, but usually for most of us, it's in the realm of these relationships where we use some of these controlling or reactive tendencies. And so in a lot of our work, we talk about that developmental shift of moving from reactive tendency to relational skill. So a lot of what you'll see if you look at some of our work with Menand and some of our work with Blue Rock is really understanding, how do we help people move from reactive to relational? And so in our work, over the years, we developed a bit of a frame for that, and understanding when we looked at different types of settings where men found help and made some progress on healing, whether it's from an addiction standpoint or whether it's from just trying to develop a sense of meaningful relationships and purpose, or whether it's in a more therapeutic realm. What we started to see is that there's these themes, and they're really kind of, they can seem almost simplistic, that really what you need is a community, a guide, a better tool than you've been using. And you need to apprentice yourself in practice with those tools. So for a lot of us, that community could be a peer group. It could be a culturally supportive group. It could be a religious group. It could be a men's group. But the need for that community, that positive reference group or that positive community is so important. And a guide could be an elder, a mentor, a coach, a physician, a therapist, an elder that understands and has done their healing and done their work, but understands the dynamics of the thing that you're dealing with. And this is really high level, but that community, that guide, and a better tool. So tools in the context that we talk about are things like questions, their mindsets and skill sets, psychological tools, cultural practices, tools that help us integrate hard things, that help us to transform our pain. And the key for me in all of this is what we understood through all of our work, and certainly my personal experience as well, is that you don't just need one or a couple of these elements, you need all of them. You need a community that gets it, that's moving in the same direction as you. You need a guide to help you understand and to grow. And you need a tool and a willingness to apprentice yourself to those new ways of being. And really, what we understand as well is that that work of using a tool in community is so important in changing culture and in changing our practices. So when we talk, and often if you listen to a talk like this, or go to a talk on men's mental health, or certainly if you go and talk about relational things or violence or any of the things that are really active public conversations, is we end up coming back to masculinities. And so we do that too a little bit, but we think about it in a very general way, that masculinity is really a set of ways of living or identities and patterns and practices. And certainly when we talk about things like help seeking, we are talking about what are the practices that lead men to be able to be open to and pursue or get help, or that maybe prevent that. And so a lot of our work, as we shifted and went through and understood all the things that we did in the development of the Menand Project, we started to look at help seeking. Well, why aren't guys looking for those supports, or why aren't we finding a way to meet them in a supportive way to help them transform their pain? So what's interesting is if you look in the help seeking literature across the board, you'll see usually a range that men who need help or are looking for help, really 11 to 30% is that range of men who are actually getting help that they need. And the themes from them are not that surprising. They don't know who to ask, who they can trust. They maybe feel embarrassed, or they feel ashamed. And some of the services and supports that are out there see that a diversion of resources toward men are actually reinforcing this man up and figure it out yourself culture. And so we really wanted to think in our development of the Menand work, how do we get in and think differently, both about engagement, but also about access? How do we connect with men in a way that's welcoming and positive and supportive, and also that streamlines and makes really accessible the services and supports that we think should be there. One study that was done recently talked about really of all the men that they talked to around help seeking, 40% just didn't know who to ask, and 40% felt too embarrassed to ask for help. And so I think that a lot of these things can be changed by shifting some of our how our services are oriented, and shifting our culture of how we respond to men when we are looking for help. So these were our three big questions. And now I want to I'll shift it a little bit to talk about the Menand Project. And I'm not going to scroll through the site. I think it's our website, which is www.menand.ca. And I want to talk a little bit about these three questions that have guided us, and some of the things that we've learned along the way. Our questions really were this: what matters for engagement with men? What enhances access with men, and what practices work for healing and repair? So we did a lot of work talking to therapists, talking to peer group leaders, understanding what actually matters, what works and what doesn't work. And so when we talk about engagement, we're talking about mental health literacy and relational skill building. We're talking about having really accessible tools, practices, and strategies for men. And we're talking about ensuring that when men look, they find what they're looking for. So if you remember that story I told about the young man who wound up on Reddit, we really want to be the place that when a guy is looking, that more positive search results show up. So that was the beginning of the idea of the digital component to the Menand project, was really to say, well, how can we not only create tools that men will find when they're looking online at 11 o'clock at night, but also that those that love men or are worried about men or care about men could send an article, send a podcast, send a video or a tool, so that they know that there's a presence out there that cares about them in that way. The next question around access, really about how do we make sure that guys know where to go, that there's resources in their community locally, there's resources virtually. And so that led to the development of a 24-hour talk and text line with trained professionals and a registry of community-based supports. And through the development of those engagement strategies and those access questions, we started understanding that we really wanted to support professionals in engaging men differently and having better results in our services and in our systems. This is our sort of model. The Menand model is really aimed to be open to men, to guys and young men who are ready to engage at different levels. And so the way we've designed it is really in this graduated model, so that there's content that's consumable and digestible at any level, that there's evidence-based tools and strategies and toolkits that men can find and work through on their own. We've got lots more coming in that. We have a partner with Menand. We have a partner as Fear Is Not Love, and they operate a 24-hour men's line, which is resources. There's trained professionals who are equipped with skills in counseling that can talk at any time of the day. And that's for people who are caring about men and worried about men, and also for men themselves. The next things that the next sort of two layers that we think are critically important are different forms of peer and cultural support groups. So we've got a little bit of work to do on this, because our model is really not to do the peer support ourselves so much as connect with all that's going on. And this conference is a great window into so much that's going on in peer support in Alberta and beyond. And then the last and most intensive resource being that psychotherapeutic, which might happen in a one-on-one counseling format or in a group format. And so our hope with how we've designed Menand is really that at whatever stage you're at in terms of wondering if you need or would like some support, that there's any level available day or night to be able to start connecting and getting some of those supports. So I didn't know what kind of connectivity we'd have for tonight. And so rather than scroll through the site, I just thought I would share a few screenshots. This is what you'll see if you land on the Menand site. We're tweaking it always and shifting and making the user experience a little better. But really, you'll land and hopefully see that there's tons of resources in all sorts of different formats as you scroll through. If you're looking for articles for yourself, or if you're looking to be able to send articles to someone you care about, we are posting weekly and working always to create a blend of both lived experience typewriting, as well as subject matter experts and clinical experts who are ensuring that there's evidence-based content around specific issues. Everything you can think of from a mental health perspective, and also building those relational skills. We really also doubled down when we started designing the tools in wanting to make sure that our tools were available not just as a document to read or a PDF worksheet, but something that you could listen to, you could watch or click through. So as you go in and look, you'll find that a lot of the tools are also available in more of a click through, where you can find exactly what you're looking through, exactly what you're looking for through a drop-down list, or you can walk through the whole process. What we've also done is tried to pay attention to what articles have traction. So over the 2 years that the site has been live, we've had one article in particular has been sort of stand out above the rest. And what's interesting about it is the article was called How to Apologize to Someone You've Hurt. And so we built an interactive toolkit, which I'd love if you'd take the time to go and check it out. It's a great animated toolkit that you can click through, pick a scenario, pick a couple characters, and go through. And what's neat about it is it's actually gamified. So if you make choices to say, you sort of choose your own adventure in terms of your responses and the conversations. And as you make choices that maybe aren't so good, your stress meter goes up, and that limits the types of choices that you can make going forward. So it's a great practice tool for someone who's trying to work through, how do I approach a conflict differently or an apology differently? What's been exciting about these tools for us is that as the tools have gotten used, we found that they've started to be used by different programs and different independent therapists as an augmentation or an add-on to whatever they're doing in the counseling room. So we're going to continue to keep building out these tools. Lots of interesting things happening there. You'll also find on the site tons of local resources that are local to you. So we've started with Alberta. We're going to keep going because I think it's going well. So if you land here, you'll find that there's a clickable map. There's a set of resources in your community that we update and keep fresh twice yearly. And we work pretty hard to make sure that those resources are, in particular, they're free and low cost. We'll start having therapist registry this year as well. But really, these are first intended to be free and low cost resources in your area, so that when you land, you can feel like you've got something in your area. And we have the 24-hour line where you can call, and they're connected into those resources as well. One of the things that led us to creating this was work that I did as part of our Blue Rock Social Impact Partners. We were part of the development of the Equally Safe project. And in Calgary, the Equally Safe project was emerged through the work of the Calgary Domestic Violence Collective, a number of agencies, and I was privileged to be involved as a consultant to help build out what that program would look like. So in 2018, we did that, and I did some of the work that some consultants in the sector have done of going out on a ride along and understanding what happens when officers attend domestic conflicts calls. And one of the things that we found through the process, and because we were in the development of the Menand strategy, understood that what law enforcement would really like to do is leave resources with the people that they've interacted with. And what we found is not because of the law enforcement, but because of the community, there isn't a lot of resources for men. And so one of the things that we started to figure out and then eventually develop these Menand cards. These are plastic cards with a QR code. We started with one card for the whole site, but we've moved to now a practice of if there's a city or jurisdiction that would like a card that leads them to a page of their local resources, we can do that. And so we've been excited to do that. Edmonton is starting to try out the cards. Calgary has used the cards. And the QR code, the card can be given from any person, any agency, any law enforcement officer to a man who's needing resources. The QR code will take them to a list of whatever's in his city, and also all the toolkits and articles and other resources you can find on the site. We're really excited about this because I think it's one small step towards increasing the access for men who otherwise wouldn't know about these resources. We do have 24-hour line, which I've mentioned. We also have a text function, which is manned not 24 hours a day, but as much as it can be through the day, and the hours are usually around the time of greatest need. And that's, I should say as well, that call line is operated by Fear Is Not Love, so accredited, well-trained staff, and really connected in with making sure that they're connecting people to the resources that they need in their community. One of the last, and I think I'm getting closer towards the end of the talk, even though I'm going to try, and Mike is going to at some point tell me, I think, One of the things that's been really cool about the Menand Project development is our work with Indigenous communities. So one of the things that we wanted to do through the development phase of the Menand Project was establish a series of advisory groups so that we could really make sure that the content that we were creating for the site was culturally sensitive and responsive. And so one of the stories I'll often tell about of the group of men that we pulled together to be an Indigenous advisory. And I was the guy who was like, hey, let's create some content for my website. And it's the advisory turned into this beautiful group of friends, and they told me, no, we're not doing that. And what we ended up doing instead, and the reason we didn't do that is because it wasn't the right time and the right way. But what we did do is create out of that advisory our Cultural Helpers Program, which is a really neat land-based cultural helpers program that invites men on reserve to learn about traditional ways and participate in getting things ready for ceremony and for sweat. And so we have men coming from addictions treatments programs, from programs that are working with men around their violence. And it's it's been a really cool experience as an add-on to anything they're doing in a program or with a therapist. And what's been also cool about that is that's led us into, through Fear is Not Love, begin to do work with Stony Corrections here in Alberta, and to work with mandated men who have come out of correction settings and are working on family healing and a more restorative process. And through that, we've continued to develop tools in that setting as well as what we're creating for more public on the consumption on the site. Couple words just about our engagement, because that's what we care about. So digitally, and I'm not a web digital type person, but I've tried to understand this as well as possible. Our digital resources. So we've had around 45,000 visits since our launch, which is a little over 2.5 years ago, 17,000 in the last 11 months. Our key search over all this time has really been about how to apologize to someone you hurt. Our toolkits, which just started to be downloadable in the last year or so, you can see 773 using the Managing Conflict toolkit, and we've had some good downloads otherwise. The piece that I think is important and that has really mattered when I've looked at the data is that those visits have led to around a little over 1,000 calls. And what's interesting about how we've tried to approach engagement is that of those 1,000 calls, if a call lasts more than 3 minutes, then the average time is 37 minutes. And what we know from all of our work in different contexts is that engagement is what drives any other part of the process: healing, accountability, building a better life, better mental health. And so engagement is what we talk about. The themes of those calls: loneliness, thoughts of suicide, and relationship challenges. What we also found, even though we started with talking about things like violence, is that the roots or the start of that conversation is around how a guy's doing with his mental health. The last thing I want to say, and I think we're going to move into questions really quick if that's a thing, is this quote, which I love, from Buckminster Fuller, is: if you want to teach people a new way of thinking, don't bother trying to teach them. Instead, give them a tool, the use of which will lead to new ways of thinking. I think this is a huge idea for how we're approaching connecting with men, is in community. The practice of a better tool becomes a practice, and we apprentice and live our ways into new ways of thinking, relating, and being. I'm gonna slam the brakes on here. Thank you so much for your time. I think it's such an important conversation. Find a community and a guide, use the right tools, transform your pain, and apprentice yourself into a new way of being. And visit the site, check out the tools, share them with someone you care about. And please let us know if there's things that you think need to be on there: resources, tools, articles. We would really love that. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
I would love to hear in the chat from anybody if they've got sort of immediate thoughts on things they'd like to see from you. And Jeff, there was a question somebody had asked about, is there an opportunity to volunteer for the Menand Project?
Yeah, 100%. So we have a few different ways that that we've tried to figure out how to be engaged. So we do have some advisories that we're working on that are usually those are around interest areas or different cultural areas. So that's a possibility. We're always, and like anyone who's ever done anything online, content is a really hard thing to keep generating, especially content that is not AI driven and just generic. And so I would love, I mean, this would be a huge thing to me, is any kind of content that you want to create that we can endorse or share or have on the site. That's another way as well.
Oh, perhaps we could write a love letter to Menand.
That would be a tremendous, I think you just, there you go.
All right. Oh, I think I just gave myself some homework.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and as we build out things and we're working, one of the things that we're really trying to do in the coming year is connect with communities first in Alberta and then further afield as well, and really figure out how do we do things that support these restorative cultures. And so peer support situations. There's lots of connecting that we want to do with, well, guys like you, Mike, and everyone else that's doing such great work in different places. And we really have that same vision. I think there's a lot of synergy there with making sure that everyone knows where the stuff is, what the stuff is, and how they can get involved. So, yeah.
Pascal's asking if there's a contact email if they've got questions.
Yeah, the easiest is info@menand.ca, info@menand.ca.
And I did drop the link in the chat. Fran's not going to just share this. He's going to share the hell out of this.
Nice.
At his work.
Nice.
Fran's our fly in, fly out worker.
Awesome. Yes. We met the other night. Yeah.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Have you developed an app, or could that work with Menand?
Well, I don't want to make promises, but one of the things that we're really excited about is we've been trying to build some infrastructure for what we've been calling the Menand Academy, so that there's some more course bases, and with that would come that app. So I get excited and I charge down the road. I'm trying to not commit us to too much all at once, but yeah, we would love to do that, because I think we could really, and not just our content, but the community's content would be great. Supportive resources, courses, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, we'd love to do that.
Are there any other questions, friends? I am attention. How do we get the cards to pass out? Harold would like to know.
Send a note to info. We're not super well established on all our systems, but info@menand.ca. It comes to me and a couple other guys, and we'll make sure you get cards. I think, Harold, you're further south in the province, and so yeah, we would love to connect around that and get some cards down to you.
Nice. All right, friends, if you've got thoughts or questions that pop up in the next minute or two, I'm going to start with my sort of closing remarks. But Jeff, if you're cool to hang tough, why don't we keep you on the line? Just because I know sometimes these things have to percolate a little bit. Yeah, Fran says he sees so much value to the FIFO community for the site. So that's fantastic. And Fran, there you go. There's homework for Fran. I think maybe nice. A fly in, fly out worker article might be relevant.
That would be great. And you know what? Our thing, we're always hungry for information about how do we create resources that are targeted to groups, because a lot of it has been evidence-based and all that, but we really want to understand, what would be useful to different communities with different experiences. So
yeah, and Kelly's offered to write an article. I just, this is the beauty of this type of thing. When we bring, there's a magic that happens, and I'm going to say when men come together with intention, but I mean, let's face it, this is a community. This isn't just men. So ladies, I don't mean to exclude you, but just there's this magic that happens when we come together with intention. And I love watching all these little sparks fly and these connections being made. So friends, if you're watching and you're not quite sure where to go or how to make the connections, I've been emailing you as your conference host, so feel free to email me back and I will make those connections. That is something that I absolutely thrive at. John's talking about older men living with loneliness. We're going to hear more about that in the next couple of days as well. We're going to hear from the Men's Sheds folks. So we'll definitely be hearing more about that. So friends, as we wrap up, once again, I want to thank all of you that made it to, so John Senden, I think I got your last name right. He's working out in Ontario. He's a therapist that's working specifically with, there he is, send him. Working specifically with men. He and I met a couple of weeks ago, and I see, John, I appreciate you because it's what, 11 o'clock in Ontario right now. So he's stuck right to the bitter end. Oh, I've got a Q&A here. Let me just have a peek. How are you getting Menand into the hands of men, business, government, schools, and everywhere? Christina wants to know, how are you moving this thing everywhere, Jeff? Come on. You're not moving fast enough.
There's only so many hours in the day. Yeah, we'd love to. And those are all conversations I would love to keep having, because I think this is an important resource.
Yeah, and this is the beauty again. Everybody here and everybody that's watching on replay, take the link, share it on your socials, talk about what you heard tonight, share Jeff's story, because the beautiful thing, Jeff, and I think you and I talked about this, when I first started speaking professionally and I wanted to get up on stage and be special. And what I realized was the most powerful thing I could give to my audience is for them to walk away and say, I thought I was the only one.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what you did here tonight. Mm-hmm. It was just, so much of what you talked about resonated. I've got 2 kids and a divorce under my belt, and I know lots of the guys that are on the line tonight too, and I know some of them have experienced exactly what you've talked about. So again, thank you for making us feel not alone. That's huge. And friends, if you're out there and you see some of us guys doing this, that's just an acknowledgement that I feel you, man. I understand what you're saying. What you're saying resonates with me. So I invite everybody when we're on camera that when somebody says something that resonates, to drop that, or maybe even a little fist bump emoji or something, just to say, I feel you, man. I feel you. All right, friends, we got 4 minutes to shut her down if we're going to stay on time. Once again, Jeff, thank you so much for showing up and with your heart and energy, as we've talked about. And friends, we are back here tomorrow night at 6 p.m. I will open up the meeting room, so that 6 p.m. one will be a meet. So it'll be on everybody on camera, and we can just hang out and chat for a bit. I might even hop on a little early. I might even hop on at 5:45 because I felt we were a little rushed tonight. Everybody wanted to hang out and just chit chat. So I'll maybe hop on a little early. So if you're so inclined, friends, feel free to hop on a little early tomorrow. But I will send out another email just recapping what happened today and what's going to happen tomorrow and Friday. And thank you, friends, and we'll call that good night. Take care.